and a Mandarin speaker communicating as well as they might.
Many are left wondering how PLA soldiers will be able to communicate with Hong Kong people in a crisis situation.
If they can be transparent and extend a hand to the Hong Kong people in a relaxed way, then there's a good chance of both sides getting to know each other. I think isolation would be the biggest threat. If they go into their barracks, lock themselves up and have no contact, then the potential for misunderstanding will be very much greater.
I think after a week or two we'll all get used to them being around, just like we got used to the British Army being around.
It's a glorious period, glorious moment.
I think that they are not so pay attention to the law, but they are respected their captains more than the law.
A little bit worried, I think. I think it'd be a little bit shaky, or a little bit rocky, but they might smooth out in the future. It'll take a lot of time, I think.
Tomorrow morning, 4,000 hand-picked soldiers, dubbed the PLA's finest, will begin their journey across the border. A rocky path may lie ahead as they attempt to step out from the dark shadows that trail them and begin a new dawn in Hong Kong. And tomorrow with the soldiers, 10 ships, 6 helicopters, and 400 other vehicles making the cross. Also, those 21 armored vehicles, which have come under heavy scrutiny and criticism from Margaret Thatcher and Governor Patton, since many of them were supposedly used in internal security, once again blurring the lines between national defense and internal matters. Now back to the studio.
Thank you, Mark. Tonight's handover ceremony will be held at the Convention and Exhibition Centre. All eyes are on Hong Kong tonight as thousands of journalists from around the world have gathered here to report on the transfer of sovereignty. Ray Rudowski is in the Press and Broadcasting Centre, which is in the Convention Centre. Ray.
Jenny and Diana, welcome to the world's largest working newsroom. There are journalists from 27 different countries, 8,000 journalists in total covering the Hong Kong story. How do they feel? What are they thinking? We'll give you more on this behind-the-scenes report. Have a look. For some journalists, covering the handover ceremonies is an emotional event, but for others, it's just another working day.
It's a bit of an anticlimax, because I thought there's going to be a lot more happening. But right now, everybody's just, hanging around, see what happens.
More than 110 news organizations have shelled out up to $25,000 each for a chance to set up a temporary booth in the Press and Broadcast Center.
Use the internet, you can send an email. There are many copy machines, and it's very cool in here. It's very important.
TVB's studio is a mini version of its main television operation. Here, producers can keep an eye on history unfolding on a bank of monitors in front of them. This army of journalists will put up to $6 million into government coffers by renting space and services. Some journalists say they're feeling the squeeze.
It's quite expensive, yeah. Yeah, it is. It is, $17 for a can of beer.
That actually does sound like a bargain for anyone who actually lives in Hong Kong. We now go to the Convention Center, where the banquet is starting to take place. Dignitaries are beginning to arrive. 60 foreign ministers have come to Hong Kong for this event to witness it, as well as a host of other internationally invited guests and members of organizations and NGOs, the United Nations, and those types of groups. As you can see, the banquet is now, guests are now being seated. It is a 3-course Western meal. Apparently, unfortunately, the kitchens were ill-equipped to serve a Chinese meal, and as a result, guests will be eating Western fare. As we begin to see the guests walking in, we will have the British and Chinese delegations sitting at one end. Once the banquet wraps up, about 11:30, the actual handover ceremonies will take place in another part of the room. Now, we understand that what will happen is there will be speeches from each delegation. The flags will be lowered. After that, Prince Charles and Governor Chris Patten will leave shortly after midnight to the Royal Yacht Britannia, where they will then leave for Britain, followed by a flotilla of the British Navy. Now, at that point, we understand that what will happen is a fireworks display that is paid for by the Hong Kong and Chinese central governments. Currently, you can see that some of the delegates are now arriving, some in national costume. This is truly an historic event, and what follows after it will be the inauguration of the SAR government, the provisional legislature, the swearing in of judges and principal officials. You can see there former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher is arriving to take her place. Let's see if we can recognize anyone else among the invited guests. There is former LegCo President Andrew Wong we see in the background. Lady Thatcher taking her seat as guests begin arriving. A delegation from the Middle East. It is truly an exciting time in Hong Kong. Throughout the day, journalists have been arriving, covering and filing for the respective medias. We see U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright with U.S. Consul General Richard Boucher. Madeleine Albright will not be attending the swearing-in ceremonies for the provisional legislature, but instead U.S. Consul General Richard Boucher will witness those ceremonies, as will Hugh Davies, the senior JLG negotiator from the British side. But the foreign ministers of Britain and the United States will not attend. Lady Thatcher is now shaking hands with Chief Secretary Anson Chan. It's quite a spectacular event. The ballroom is done up in a very sort of elaborate colors. Lighting is just perfect. It is truly a one-time deal. Even though the Press and Broadcast Center and the Convention Center will be used for other events, there will probably be never be another event like this one.
And Ray, we have the menu for this three-course meal. The meal will have start off with a Scottish salmon and lobster medallion served with lettuce on a phyllo pastry shell covered with a champagne and dill dressing. And then the main course is, Jenny?
The main course is stuffed chicken breast with forest mushroom and a creamy herb sauce. Apparently, incidentally, the china is made in Germany, the silverware in Switzerland. Wine selection.
Yes.
Moet and Chandon champagne.
And the meal will cost Hong Kong taxpayers $1,625 per head.
In addition to the meal, there will be a show put on. There is a PLA honor guard which will perform at this ceremony, which arrived a short time ago. It seems that everything has sort of been put on hold as a result of the guests arriving late, etc., etc. The farewell ceremonies for British forces wrapped up a half hour later than had been scheduled due to rain. And that perhaps has set back the entire evening. We see members of the Britain's ambassador to China has just arrived. We see him there in the foreground. He's being escorted to his seat by the woman in the yellow with the K. He's in the foreground now, as with other members of the British delegation from China.
That's Tony Galsworthy, who used to head the JLG for the British side in Hong Kong.
There was actually a humorous, perhaps not for the guests, but at least 4,000 guests have been invited from around the world, but some 1,000 hadn't responded by last week, and many of them were from Hong Kong. Hopefully, many of those people heard the call and got their RSVPs in on time. This is an event that many would not want to miss.
Former Governor Lord Wilson coming in with former British Foreign Minister Geoffrey Howe. Lord Howe now, I think.
Lord Howe.
Yes.
Right. And Lady Natasha Wilson.
A truly illustrious gathering.
There's Michael Hazeltine, if you can spot him, in a blue shirt, blonde hair, former Deputy Prime Minister of Britain.
There is the commander of British forces, Major General Brian Dutton, arriving in full dress uniform. I think we'll see him again when we cut back to the close-up.
Up to 600 waiters are supposed to be catering, serving the guests here.
There's Geoffrey Howe again, Lord Howe, who of course played a very crucial role in the negotiations of the handover of Hong Kong at one point.
The price for this elaborate banquet will be $6.5 million. It's supposed to be one of the most expensive dinners ever hosted in Hong Kong.
Guests gradually going into the convention center. Just in case you're wondering, the banquet was prepared by a Frenchman, china supplied by Germans, silverware, Swiss. I believe that's William Hague, who's the Conservative Party chairman, the new Conservative Party chairman.
At the end of the farewell ceremonies for British forces, Governor Patton, Prince Charles, and many of the other dignitaries were thoroughly soaked. Perhaps they have had to go back and change on the Royal Yacht Britannia into newer and drier clothes. There is Liu Ping, director of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, taking his seat.
And we'll take a respite from the official banquet to bring you this story. The Chinese President Jiang Zemin and British Prime Minister Tony Blair are holding talks in Hong Kong at a hotel in Hong Kong. This is the first meeting between the heads of government of the two countries since 1992. As Claire Penketh reports, there's also been a series of high-level bilateral discussions in Hong Kong today.
It's been a busy day of diplomatic activity in Hong Kong. One of the first meetings was held between the British Foreign Minister, Robin Cook, and the US Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. Cook and Albright both plan to boycott the swearing-in of the Provisional Legislature in protest at the scrapping of the Legislative Council. Albright said she hoped there would be no other major changes in Hong Kong after the handover.
Hopefully, these leaders will understand that the Hong Kong of tomorrow must look like the Hong Kong of today. And that is a Hong Kong that is free and a Hong Kong in which personal freedoms exist and will not be squeezed out.
These sentiments were echoed by Robin Cook.
And that is why we are both agreed and are both saying to the members of both the Hong Kong government of the future and the representatives of the government of the People's Republic of China that there must be restored to Hong Kong free and fair elections for a new democratic Legislative Council as soon as possible and in any event within 12 months.
Then Madeleine Albright went on to meet the Chinese Foreign Minister, Chen Chi-chen, and gave him the same message regarding Hong Kong's future freedoms. Cook also met Chen Chi-chen. According to China's official news agency, they promised to put Hong Kong's handover problems behind them and to seek stronger ties. The Portuguese Foreign Minister also met Chen Chi-chen, and they discussed the future of Macau. Other talks included the Chinese Foreign Minister meeting his Japanese counterpart, where it was agreed that the Japanese Prime Minister would visit Beijing in early September. Claire Penketh, TVP News.
And we'll take a break now.
And coming up is the final episode of a public affairs special, The End of an Era. We'll be back at 10 o'clock to bring you more about the handover of Hong Kong. See you then.
Stay tuned.
the SAR Day Extravaganza. The SAR Day July 1st Reunification Gala in Beijing. Hosted live by Winnie Young, broadcasting live from Beijing tomorrow night at 8:30. Followed by the SAR Day Hong Kong 97 Spectacular. Hosted by Flora Chan and Jeff Wong tomorrow night at 10. History in the making. See it on Pearl.
The Sound of Music, starring Marie Osmond, is coming to Hong Kong.
A deer, a female deer. These are a few of my favorite things.
Don't miss Broadway's favorite musical, live at Hong Kong's Academy for Performing Arts, July 16 to August 3. Tickets available at Optics or call 2805-2804.
Why is everybody rushing to make Chinese clothes?
Let's all support Dress Chinese Day.
Why is everybody rushing to make Chinese clothes?
Let's all support Dress Chinese Day.
Universal Genève time is now 9:31.
This is the last episode of our 6-part series. Hong Kong, the end of an era, refers to the end of 156 years of British rule. Actually, more than 50 years ago, the nationalist government of Chiang Kai-shek had wanted to take back the new territories. And later, the British had tried to perpetuate its administration of Hong Kong beyond 1997. In this last episode, we examine Britain's retreat from the territory.
I think the withdrawal of Britain is honourable. I think that's not a bad way to go out. Hong Kong is admired throughout the world. It's admired not just for its economic competitiveness, but it's admired for its way of life.
This was the last public concert at Government House. Hong Kong has travelled a long and winding road from the start of British rule 156 years ago to the dismantling of colonial insignias today. In the Second World War, defeated British troops retreated from Hong Kong. Concurrently, Hong Kong's fate hung in the balance in Sino-British talks held in Chongqing, China. The negotiations between the Allies were over the new territories. The Chinese nationalists wanted it back. They had the United States' support, but Britain resisted.
There would be practically no value in our retaining the island and the tip of Kowloon only, where we should be exposed to every sort of tail-twisting and effective obstruction from any Chinese authority.
So Britain suggested the issue be dealt with after the war's been won. Chiang Kai-shek agreed, but he intended, after victory, to recover the new territories directly from the Japanese. However, when Japan surrendered, Chiang Kai-shek did not take back the new territories. It was the British who accepted the Japanese surrender of Hong Kong. The nationalists only sent their chief negotiator, Major General Pan Wah Guo, to the ceremony. Today, the colonel's son, Pan Han Tang, says his father had never forgotten that moment.
I think deep in his heart, maybe because he's a person of a very strong patriotism, And he likes to see that Hong Kong to get back to the hand of the Chinese people in time. He thinks maybe it's a time for the Hong Kong to input as a strong economic power to China.
Just before Japan's surrender, crack nationalist troops were stationed in East China and Guangxi province, while the nearest British soldiers were in the Philippines. This secret document, declassified only last year, showed the British were very worried the nationalists might beat them to Hong Kong to fill the administrative vacuum left by the Japanese surrender.
We have further in mind that if such irregulars did succeed in bringing off a successful coup in Hong Kong, the Chinese government would be likely to sponsor them, and we should not only have lost whatever remaining prestige we have in China, but we should have an extremely difficult and embarrassing task in getting the Chinese out of the place.
But as the British fleet was being dispatched to Hong Kong, a new president took office in Washington, and he did not support the return of the new territories to China. At the same time, Chiang Kai-shek needed Allied backing in his civil war against the Communists, so he decided to put Hong Kong on the back burner. This was Chiang's last directive to Panhua War.
Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang says, I think the time is not mature yet, so let's wait. I think that's the final decision from Generalissimo. Chiang Kai-shek was not quite happy about this situation, but finally he decided to go along with Mr. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill because China needs their support. And from the American viewpoint, maybe they need UK more than China in order to balance the international political situation.
As the Communists won repeated battles against the nationalists, Britain started worrying whether it could perpetuate colonial rule in Hong Kong.
Troops of Mao Zedong marched into Shanghai unopposed. Within weeks, they were at the gates of Hong Kong. Troops went out from Britain to reinforce the garrison. Hong Kong was determined to stay British.
But the Communists stopped at Shenzhen. There were several reasons why the Chinese Communists did not take back Hong Kong, even with an East-West Cold War and Western embargo on China.
Hong Kong was a very important regional headquarters for the Communists. Hong Kong was being used by the Western powers as a spy hole watching into China. Hong Kong was also China's spy hole for the rest of the world. Apart from the political value in the reconstruction of the Chinese economy, Hong Kong was also an important source of revenue. And in any event, the Chinese Communist government decided they could raise the future of Hong Kong at any time they want. And in the long term, time could only be in China's favor. So why rush?
They could take it back at any time. There would be a price they would have to pay internationally, perhaps, and maybe on the spot.
Beijing soon devised a long-term policy for Hong Kong. It was long-term planning and optimal utilization. So Hong Kong continued as a British colony. As China was ravaged by political, economic and social upheavals, and fleeing the chaos, the mainlanders who flooded Hong Kong in the 1950s gave the colony the impetus for development.
Although that China didn't take over Hong Kong in 1945, and we found that this is a kind of a fortune and luck for all the Chinese people. And by chance or by mistake, whatever. But for all the Chinese people, I think this is luck.
But as Hong Kong progressed by leaps and bounds, the 99-year lease of the new territories was running out.
Something had to be done to get clear about what would happen in 97.
We had, for the first time in China, a pragmatic, practical government under Deng Xiaoping. Before that, we had had some very violent regimes in China with whom negotiation would have been quite impossible, I think, or certainly very dangerous. Now, with Deng Xiaoping, we felt that we could talk in a reasonable way.
The historic meeting between Governor Murray MacLehose and Chinese paramount leader Deng Xiaoping was the first ever initiated by the British Hong Kong government to discuss Hong Kong affairs with Beijing. MacLehose said he only intended to discuss new territories' land leases.
There's a body of people who think I was terribly stupid to raise this whole question of 1997. In fact, I didn't raise it, Deng did. And he said, well, 1997, that may seem rather a long time ahead, but I expect before then there will be discussions of some sort. Meanwhile, he asked me to do everything I could to encourage Hong Kong people to invest in China. I said that Hong Kong's ability to make a contribution to the modernization program depended on Hong Kong's prosperity. If Hong Kong's very poor, obviously it couldn't make any contribution. And its prosperity depended to a very large extent on confidence, international confidence and local confidence in it. And I gave as an example of this the question of these new territories leases, that if, as the time drew nearer for these leases to have a very short duration, obviously confidence would evaporate.
And we thought we would try, first of all, to see whether there could be a quiet, tacit agreement not to go too deeply into it, and to allow the land leases to be extended and a British administration at least to continue.
MacLehose recalled the meeting was inconclusive, but he said Deng Xiaoping did take the occasion to lay investors' hearts at ease.
He said there could be capitalism in Hong Kong and socialism in China well into the next century. And I must say that struck a chord with me.
At the time, Beijing had already formulated the concepts of one country, two systems and Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong. In 1982, as Chinese and British leaders prepared to meet, China's position became very clear.
如果是不受惠，我们确实是变成第二个李鸿章了，是吧？我们中国新中国没那么窝囊，是吧？没那么窝囊，我们一定要受惠。
At the time, Britain was winning a war with Argentina over the Falklands, another British colony. And Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher went to Beijing flushed with victory.
I think she was, in her post-Falklands mood at first, inclined to see the matter in terms of, too black and white, a feeling that we mustn't give way at any point to China.
Mrs. Thatcher thought of returning the leased new territories and keeping Hong Kong Island and Kowloon south of Boundary Street. Foreign Office officials had to show her a map to explain why that wasn't possible.
The dividing line ran through the middle of Kowloon, that all the utilities were in the wrong part, that the population would all congregate in the remaining 8%. The whole thing was not on.
Britain had another strategy, and it was prepared to confront China with it. Coming up after the break.
A day to be remembered. Pearl's motion picture premiere.
For a closer look at Japan, win your way in style and comfort. Fly the new JAS route from Hong Kong to Osaka.
At Tom Lee Music, we have instruments of all shapes and sizes to suit everyone's style. Discover the joys of music at Tom Lee Music.
Relief of pain and fever miseries. Fortalin, of course.
This coming Saturday, July the 5th, exploding from within Happy Valley Racecourse, come and witness the greatest pop music concert in the history of Hong Kong. A massive 6 hours of non-stop live performances on the largest stage ever built in the region. Join 35,000 others in this pop music carnival of the century. See you there.
Jianlibao can boost my physical condition to the top and the best. Its components of alkaline and honey refresh my fatigued and dehydrated body back to normal.
We were going to tell you about the unique style of the all-new Mazda Uno's 800 Millennium Edition 2. But then we thought we'd let the picture do the talking. The all-new Uno's 800 Millennium Edition 2 from Mazda.
The Electrical Products Safety Regulation to control the supply of household electrical products will come into operation in May 1998. The regulation requires that all household electrical products must comply with essential safety requirements. Be smart. Make sure that the electrical products you buy are up to the safety requirements. For further information, please obtain leaflets from district offices and the Electrical and Mechanical Services Department.
On the eve of Hong Kong's handover to China, both its stock and property markets have been hitting record highs, and immigrants are returning in droves. More than a dozen years ago, when Hong Kong's fate was being negotiated, few could have imagined this. Margaret Thatcher's visit to Beijing was a prelude to Sino-British talks on Hong Kong. Deng Xiaoping also told her China would take back the territory. But Mrs. Thatcher argued that Hong Kong Island and Kowloon had been ceded to Britain.
One point about the treaties, I believe they are valid at international law. And you can't, if countries try just to abrogate treaties like that, then it is very serious indeed. Because if a country will not stand by one treaty, it would not stand by another treaty.
这个鸦片战争啊，三个和平条约，我们并不要求现在的英国人民替他们这个祖先负这个责任。但是如果现在还是坚持三个不平等条约，那么他就跟他那个祖先一样。
Formal talks on Hong Kong's fate began in 1983. The British proposed giving up sovereignty in exchange for continued administration.
We tried at first to say, all right, we will accept Chinese titular sovereignty, but we will retain British administration. The object was that naturally we wished to retain as much control as possible.
And the advice we had from Hong Kong people, from EXCO and EDGCO, was that the British administration was the glue, as it were, that held Hong Kong together, and that the systems would only function if Britain had responsibility for the administration.
那时候有个说法，好比是一个公司啊，这个你公司董事长是中国，这个经理是英国，这个国家的领土不可以给公司比，是不是？
Look, Hong Kong works, it thrives. It does that because it has British administration. That is why international investors have confidence in it. A change of regime could destroy that confidence.
它作为在运动的军事基地、政治基地、经济基地、特务基地，你看对它的作用多大？
The negotiations stalled. Hong Kong people became very nervous. A crisis erupted in September 1983. Hong Kong people never had a chance to participate in the talks to decide their own future, nor were they allowed a referendum on their own fate, as in some other colonies. Gibraltar, in the south of Spain, with only 30,000 people, had a similar situation. 30 years ago, in 1967, Spain wanted to recover its sovereignty, so Britain held a referendum in Gibraltar.
Gibraltar voted to retain its links with Britain with a decisive 12,138 votes. Spain only received 44 votes.
Now, it was always clear that that would not be possible for Hong Kong because of the Chinese attitude. And there was no question whatever that China would not permit it. So what could Britain do?
他反对英国人，香港人那个作为一张牌，在这个作为谈判当中的一个筹码。
At the time, only traditional pro-Beijing groups openly supported reunification with China. EXCO and LegCo members did not, and they lobbied London against it.
港人治港，沒有前例可換，而基本上社會主義同資本主義嘅制度有好多地方可能產生矛盾。
Many of the members of the Executive Council at the time of the Joint Declaration and negotiations now support Chinese attitude. Well, that's understandable. I can understand that. People have to adjust to reality.
The reality then was that Britain would have to capitulate.
But it's right for me to tell you now that it would not be realistic to think of an agreement that provides for continued British administration in Hong Kong after 1997.
China never wavered from its stand, but it says it did take British interests into account in the talks.
原来的华侨银行可以继续发行，你比如还有这个航空民航，是吧？民航的有关规定，它也照顾了影子产权。
The talks concluded after 22 rounds.
秋天是收获的季节。
The Sino-British Joint Declaration was signed in December 1984 and was well received.
When you had the Joint Declaration signed, it did two things. Firstly, it set a date certain, a definite date for the transfer of sovereignty of the 30th, midnight on the 30th of June. And it also stated, for the first time from the Chinese, that Britain would remain responsible for the administration of Hong Kong until that time, and that China would give its cooperation. Never had that before in in writing in formal statements. Secondly, there was the provision in the joint declaration that the legislature would be constituted by elections after the transfer of sovereignty.
So British rule in Hong Kong had to end, and Hong Kong would become a special administrative region of China. The day of reunification is here.
我这个人生活的这个历程啊，是从我们民族灾难最深重的这个时候，啊，一直到不断的取得这个胜利，一直到我们把香港收回，是吧？这应该说是我们这一代人的幸运，是吧？应该说是，这一生无憾，是吧？无憾。
I think for British governments and for the British people, the idea of handing over the fate of 6 million people who had been brought up under a Western system of values and freedoms while retaining their Chineseness and handing it over to a government which, for all its economic reforms, is still a one-party communist government, has not been easy.
Government House will be turned into a museum.
Oh, that'll go. I don't think that will,
No.
That belongs to the British government.
But the last colonial governor of Hong Kong, Chris Patten, is shipping home some of the antique furniture he's bought in Hong Kong.
I think that there's an elegance and a stylishness about Chinese furniture.
This portrait of Queen Elizabeth will also be sent back to Britain. But Chris Patten hopes British rule will leave some lasting legacies.
This has been one of the freest and most decent and cleanest places in Asia or beyond. I think if people hold on to those values, I think if people hold on to those principles and those ways of doing things, there is every reason why Hong Kong in the future should be an even finer place. I think the greatest contribution is that it's given the Chinese people of Hong Kong the opportunity to be themselves. It's a Chinese success story, a Hong Kong Chinese success story, but one, I think, to which Britain has contributed good public administration and the rule of law.
Well, I think at least 85 to 90% is the Chinese people effort. They are well known for its adaptability. That is the best assets to start with. And that they're prepared to do any work change.
Hong Kong people's diligence, Britain's systems, China's historical development, its reforms and opening up, these have all made Hong Kong what it is today.
它也应该是共荣之城，我们又不是把它打败了，但是这在中国来说，我们也是吸取了100多年来的耻辱，是吧？在他来说，也是丢掉这么一个殖民统治的这么一个包袱。
I don't think we have anything much to condemn ourselves about. I think we managed pretty well up to the last 5 years.
In the last 5 years of British rule, Governor Chris Patten's electoral reforms and his amendments of draconian laws caused a rancorous dispute between China and Britain.
他这样做怎么能够 光荣，只能求这个表面上的光荣，不能求到实质上的光荣。
When the electoral system was changed from the understandings and agreements with China, then, of course, the through train was cancelled. So that's why we're where we are today.
people in Hong Kong now know the difference between a fair election and one which is, shall we say, less fair. So I am perfectly happy to stand on our record on democratic accountability and on our record on civil liberties.
Sino-British disputes over Hong Kong will soon be history.
For myself and my family, it will inevitably be a moment of some sadness when the flags change and when we go on Britannia and sail down the harbour with the lights and the fireworks and the crowds. But on the other hand, I will think that it's not the end of the story for Hong Kong. I will think that it is the beginning of a new chapter.
Hong Kong's long-term interests and China's long-term interests are the same, because what is good for Hong Kong is good for China. What is good for China is very good for Hong Kong. If we have the long-term interest, that is the most paramount. On short-term basis, there will be disagreement, and we'll quietly talk through them and work it out. I'm very confident of that.
Bad mind, bad hand.
You, Peter Pan, I...
縱是以往今天，處處也見精彩。完全無對艱辛挫折。
Vitality beyond limits. Amino Gear. Quality amino acid drink.
Invest in yourself.
Now you can let yourself go. But do it quickly, before everything disappears.
Enter the new century. Shape the new Asia. Emperor Group.
今天不回家。
座位靈活編排，節目任你安排，全新萬事得 Friendly 8人 ORV。
今天不回家。
30號至7月1沙田新城市廣場。
好多年前，我冇辦法可以想像香港可以好似而家咁。
It's remarkable how Hong Kong has changed. Today, we are a major regional and global service center, earning our living by selling our skills, our professionalism, our enterprise, our creativity, and our reputation for integrity. The services we provide have become our biggest money earner. Service is what keeps us strong.
Terror strikes in Never Never Land.
Good evening. A huge handover extravaganza has started in Tiananmen Square in Beijing. Mary Lois Chan is standing by at the square. Mary Lois.
Yes, here we are in front of the countdown clock. For the last 3 years, it's been counting down Hong Kong's return, and now it's ticking away its last few thousand seconds. The Mayor of Beijing has just declared that the celebrations here have officially opened, and he's just given a speech extolling the glory of Hong Kong's return to motherland. Tiananmen Square is, of course, the perfect setting for an occasion like this. Let's just take a look around. Over there you can see the gateway to the Forbidden City. Next to the portrait of Chairman Mao, a huge video screen keeping us up to date with what's going on. Also, just over there you can see the Great Hall of the People. Within those walls, much of Hong Kong's fate was sealed. The Sino-British Joint Declaration was signed there in 1984. Also, the Basic Law was drafted and passed there as well. At the moment, we're still waiting for the fireworks to begin. This is the first time since 1994 that the capital has seen fireworks. There had been a ban, but at the National People's Congress this March, the Premier Li Peng suggested that the ban be lifted for tonight's events. There will be altogether 3 rounds of fireworks. We can expect the first to begin at any minute. All the festivities tonight will be highly patriotic in flavour. Let's just take a look at what's going on now.
And that was Mary-Louise Chan in Beijing. We'll return there a little bit later. But now back in Hong Kong, Statue Square has been the site of various democracy rallies and exhibits throughout this day. Right now, a group of some 20 different parties have come together for a rally. Deborah Khan joins us live from Statue Square. Deborah?
Thank you, Diana. As you said, a coalition of about 20 groups, including the Frontier Party, is now staging a rally right behind me. They've been singing songs, reading declarations, calling for democracy. Any minute now, they're expected to go over to the Legislative Council right next door and tie yellow ribbons around the columns there, calling for the return of democracy in Hong Kong. The road in front of the Legislative Council has been completely blocked off. On that side, the Democratic Party has set up its own stage, which it will use to hold its own rally. Member Zito Hua is expected to light a flame, a torch at midnight to represent the eternal flame of democracy. And of course, at 1 a.m., Martin Lee will come over from the handover ceremony and deliver the party's manifesto from the balcony of the Legislative Council. That's what's going on from here. Diana?
Yes, Deborah. And we'll go back, we'll continue our coverage with this story on Asian values. Asian values has become the catchword of a new generation. Tung Chee-hwa launched the campaign last year when he ran for chief executive. Since then, the term has come to symbolize his hopes for Hong Kong after the handover. But the ideology has also drawn criticism from some who called it a veiled attempt to silence dissent. Now, Stacey Wilkins has more.
I believe we need to renew our commitment to the good, traditional Chinese values.
And with those words, Tung Chee-hwa hopes to bring in a whole new ideal to Hong Kong. Hard work, respect for family, commitment to education, and sacrifice for the community. This is the core of Tung's platform. And Siddle Lee could be the poster child for Tung's campaign. Asian values rule her life.
They are my family. So I have the duty to take care of them. In Chinese traditional, all the youngest child will living with their family until they married.
The 28-year-old young professional wants to finish her studies in the United States, but is postponing the move until her family lands a spot in a government housing project for the elderly.
Because once I leave Hong Kong, I don't want they suddenly have no homes to live. So I already applied, but it has to take time, at least 2 or 3 years.
Siddle sees this as her duty, a legacy of the values her parents raised her with. She puts all the bills, including the $5,500 rent. The Lees hope their youngest daughter won't have to sacrifice much longer. Academic Joseph Chang says these values give families a long-term plan.
Having a kind of long-term horizon, so much so that even if you cannot accomplish what what you aim for in your own lifetime, you hope that children can realize those objectives.
The chief executive designate wants Hong Kong to return to what he calls traditional values dating back to Confucius. He says if people stand united rather than confront authority, Hong Kong will emerge from the transition with a stronger society and an even more prosperous future. Tung's platform urges people to forget about individual rights and work for the greater good of society. Democratic Party President Martin Lee calls it an anachronism.
His set of values is 2 generations, I think, out of line with the Hong Kong community, which has progressed so much in the last 10 years in particular.
The longtime fighter for democracy worries emphasis on the collective good spells the end of freedom of expression. Long-held rights like protest marches, forming political parties, and grilling government officials are set to go after the handover.
So people are more forward-looking. They treasure their freedoms more and more. They want to have more and more say in the way their government is run. And how can you set the clock back?
Not so, says pro-China leader Zheng Yuk-sing.
I don't think when we stress Asian values, it necessarily means that we should, play down the importance of individual rights. We have to, again, to use Xi Jinping's words, strike a balance.
Singaporean leader Lee Kuan Yew advocates the resurgence of Asian values. The former prime minister champions the superiority of Asian values over those of the West. Lee cites his own small country with a population close to 3 million as an example. Singapore is thriving. Lee says the Lion City booms because it isn't dragged down by welfare payouts, dysfunctional families, and violent crime.
Let me know where you're going to be staying in Hong Kong.
But journalist Philip Bowering says it's pushing the argument too hard to explain Singapore's success with simplistic labels.
It's often quite difficult to pin down what is meant by Asian value. You know, you could say equally well, there's something exclusively Asian about these values, that these are, the same ones that were responsible for the strength of many Western countries.
Bowering went head-to-head with Lee Kuan Yew 3 years ago when an article he wrote on Asian values in the International Herald Tribune was challenged by the Singapore government in court. His paper published an apology and was allowed to continue circulation in Singapore. But that judgment hasn't stopped him from speaking out. Bowering says Asian values have been hijacked in some countries, like North Korea, where the late Kim Il-sung and his son, Kim Jong-il, used the power to promote themselves, and in Indonesia, where President Suharto offers financial favoritism to his children.
It's also true to say that in some Asian countries, this emphasis on what is deemed to be the broader communal interest, in fact, when you look a bit more closely, comes down to giving favors to certain well-positioned groups.
Swiss economist Dr. Mark Farber agrees.
I have to laugh when Asians tell me about the collective good, because you look at most Asian countries, that the wealth disparity is so huge. Where is the collective good? You have poverty in most Asian countries, and they are saying Singapore is probably an exception, but say you go to Indonesia, to China, to India, you have huge wealth disparity.
Dr. Farber knows about Asian values gone bad. He studies them. The man nicknamed Dr. Doom for his dire predictions researches everything from history to philosophy to chart a market. His findings?
The Voltaire, he said the right thing. When it comes to money, people are all of the same religion.
Asian values have added to David Tang's bottom line. The flamboyant businessman says the renewed interest in ideology has sparked a desire for mainland fashion.
I start a business, or I've started 2 businesses essentially, which sell China. There is a commercial aspect to that, in the sense that, because I think the timing is correct, but 1997. I'm riding on the crest of greater knowledge and acknowledgement and appreciation of China and things Chinese.
Years ago, Tang sensed the mood. He stocks old-style cheongsams and qipao-style garments in his central shop.
Let's just go back to the cultural, things which affect us. Clothes we wear, motifs we like to use, icons, etc. These are the things which we need to bring back into our modern lives so that we can start a renaissance, a resurrection of what was left off.
He's America's premier political humorist.